In this video, I will be giving you another few search terms that I have found useful in looking for AI generated art on lexica.art. The first term, in no particular order, is Roger Dean. That's Roger space Dean. Now, Roger Dean was an illustrator or artist who is best known for doing a lot of record covers, as in LP covers and inserts, particularly perhaps in the 70s and particularly associated with prog rock or progressive rock. So I think he worked with Yes, and I don't know if he worked with Led Zeppelin, but with bands like that tended towards sort of fantasy imagery, I suppose, and it had a sort of brightly coloured psychedelic look. Basically did big landscapes. And as I've said before, some artists AI is sort of bad at imitating, and some artists AI is good at imitating, and he seems to be one of the ones that AI is good at imitating. So you get a lot of sort of, I suppose, big, overwhelming fantasy landscapes, sometimes with small little figures in them, sometimes without. I'll just go through a few more examples. This one is a bit unusual in that it isn't brightly coloured. Roger Dean's real work and the stuff you find when you search on Lexica both tend towards very bright colours, very bright, often primary colours. This is sort of more like what you'd expect. So if that is of interest to you, Roger Dean is one term that you might want to use. The second term is Gamma World. GAMMAWORLD, Gamma World. Now, Gamma World was a tabletop role-playing game originally put out by TSR, the people who were putting out Dungeons and Dragons at the time. And it was set after a nuclear war, but it was an interesting combination of it was sort of based on the fear of nuclear war that was prevalent at the time in the 1980s, but it tended towards the fantastical. It wasn't really a realistic depiction of what it would be like to live after a nuclear war. There were lots of mutations that were basically superpowers and things like mutant plants and sort of cults that worshipped machines and cults that wanted to wipe out all mutants and etc. etc. It was really basically fantasy, I guess, with a dusting of being post-apocalyptic. And what you get, or what I've found with the search term, is somewhat varied, but it tends towards these sort of fairly fantastical post-apocalyptic landscapes, or often post-apocalyptic landscapes. So let's look at a couple. That looks like a sort of, to me, looks like a kind of ruined futuristic city. That's sort of much the same. So you get a kind of sort of science fiction art with a particular look. Everything looks very kind of grungy and worn down, and I guess you'd say post-apocalyptic, or often does anyway. Again, sort of ruined cities, ruined futuristic cities. None of this really looks like the actual art that was used in Gamma World, which tended to be of a lot lower quality. And the term Gamma World isn't, if you've been looking at the actual term that was used to generate this, it doesn't have the term Gamma World in it. So I'm not sure how Lexica works. How does Lexica recognise that this is something associated with Gamma World? Well, I don't know, but it obviously does, and so it gives you this particular feel of science fiction art. Sometimes it has stuff that seems to be taken from War of the Worlds. You sometimes get titles that almost say War of the Worlds, and you sometimes get what look like the Martian tripods. I guess because War of the Worlds is a similar, it's got one word in common, and it's also science fiction, so perhaps it's sort of associated in the data that this thing's drawing from. Anyway, for whatever reason, it seems to give pretty good results. And the final one I'm going to share with you, probably my favourite, although that's quite subjective, is Masked, M-A-S-K-E-D. Now, you might say, well, why not just use mask? Of course, doing masked gives you exactly what you might expect, which is lots of masked figures, the majority of whom seem to be women. Why not just put in mask? Well, you can, and of course there's a big overlap in the results that you get. But mask seems to give you slightly more pictures of just masks without any people wearing them. And personally, I would find that less useful. I suppose if you're doing a game where you have sort of magic items and you want a mask and you don't want it, you just want the item by itself and you don't want a person in it, well, that would be more useful. But most of the time, when you're looking for art, you want a character. So you're probably going to find masked better. And what you get is, to a great extent, not particularly surprising. You get people in masks. They tend towards the ornate. If you've been watching my previous videos, you'll know that if you look at headdress, you get some very elaborate costumes that can include a mask. These tend to be, I mean, in terms of real world things, they're still extremely ornate. I mean, if someone was wearing that would be considered, a very ornate mask. But the results for masked seem to be less ornate than the results for headdress. You do get some results that seem to come from the same person who does the headdress results that I like. Let's see if I can find one like this one. Seems to be done by the same person who does a lot of the headdress results that I pointed out in a previous video and really liked. But this seems to be perhaps the less tall ones, although that one's quite ornate as well. I really like that one with looks like it's got two sort of birds facing in opposite directions. Sometimes it'll give you, as with that one, it'll give you a mask without anyone in it, but usually there's someone in it. I also really like this sort of bird-like one. And as I say, those people are my favourites. There are others that aren't by that person. Most of the results in Masked aren't by that person, and they're pretty good too. If you want a sort of more realistic, that's more like a mask that a person might actually have, rather than something that's complete fantasy. So if you want something a bit more realistic, this would be better than headdress. I mean, that's more of a costume, but something like that, I can imagine a person wearing that, or that one, I won't go through the whole one, but I think you pretty much get the idea. So those are the 3 results that I found: Roger Dean, Gamma World, and Masked. And as always, I'm going to continue looking for other useful terms, and as soon as I have some more, I will do a new video, and I hope that you will tune in then.